One of the biggest mistakes people make about retirement is thinking it is mainly a math problem. They think the whole challenge is to pile up enough money, hit a number, leave work, and then begin enjoying life. The money matters. I would never tell you otherwise. But after watching people spend decades building, preserving, losing, rebuilding, and finally trying to step into a freer stage of life, I can tell you something that matters just as much as the portfolio. A good retirement is not built only by what you keep. It is also shaped by what you finally have the courage to let go. That is where many people get stuck. They spend 40 years accumulating. They get very good at buying, storing, financing, maintaining, managing, and preserving. Then one day retirement arrives, and they try to carry the entire old life into a new stage that was never designed to hold it. That is when weight becomes visible. A house that once felt perfect starts acting like a job. A second vehicle starts acting like a bill with dust on it. A collection starts acting like an annual leak. Helping grown children starts acting like a quiet theft from the years that were supposed to belong to you. Even an old title, an old sense of identity, an old professional self can become something heavy. Most people do not notice the burden at first because the burden is dressed as love, loyalty, nostalgia, responsibility, or success. That is what makes it dangerous. The things weighing people down in retirement rarely look foolish from the outside. Very often they look respectable. That is why I want to talk about them plainly. I have never believed the purpose of money was to collect the largest pile possible and then die with a very polished inventory. The purpose of money is to buy time, choice, dignity, and room to live the life that actually fits you. When you understand that, retirement stops being a simple finish line. It becomes a design question. What life am I trying to build now, and what parts of the old structure no longer belong inside it? That is the right question. Not only how much more can I hang on to, I have known two broad types of retirees. The first type arrives at the threshold, and do I have enough? Those people are often more prepared than they think, but fear makes every decision feel permanent, and every simplification feel like loss. The second type knows the numbers work, and feels the urgency of time. They know they are ready enough. What they feel is not fear of shortage. What they feel is the sudden recognition that the healthy, active years are not unlimited, and they do not want to spend them maintaining an old structure that no longer serves the life they actually want. Both groups need the same lesson. Retirement improves when life is simplified intelligently, not stripped bare, simplified. That distinction matters. I am not arguing for deprivation. I am arguing for alignment. And alignment often begins with selling, releasing, or reducing things that made perfect sense in one chapter and very little sense in the next. The largest and most obvious example is the house. People are often emotional about houses because a house is never just a piece of property. It is memory. It is family history. It is proof that years mattered. It is where birthdays happened, where arguments passed, where holidays collected, where ordinary days turned into a life. I understand all of that. I would never tell someone that emotional reality is fake simply because the spreadsheet says otherwise, but I would ask a harder question: are you keeping the house because it still fits your life, or because it fits your memory of your life? Those are different things. A house that was exactly right for a family of 5 may become strangely oversized for 2 people who now spend half the year traveling or dreaming about freedom from maintenance. A staircase that once signaled success may become risk. A yard that once held games may become obligation. A large utility bill, large tax bill, large repair list, and large amount of unused space may quietly start draining energy from the very years the house was supposed to honor. I remember a couple who had spent decades in the home where they raised their children. They loved the neighborhood. They loved the walkability. They loved the town square nearby, the little routines, the park, the familiar rhythm of the place. What they did not love anymore was the weight of managing a house designed for a larger life than the one they now lived. They had imagined that staying put automatically meant staying happy, because the house held so much history. What they slowly realized was that the history lived inside them already. They did not need 4 extra bedrooms and a maintenance calendar to prove it. Once they sold, something surprising happened. They felt relieved. The equity became useful instead of decorative. The expenses dropped. The maintenance dropped. Most importantly, the house stopped telling them who they had to keep being. That is what a lot of people miss. A large house can become a silent identity prison. It says you must continue managing the stage even after the play has changed. Sometimes the smartest thing a retiree can do is stop being a house manager and become a life manager again. That phrase matters. Many people in later life are not actually living inside their homes. They are serving them. That is a poor trade. The same principle applies in a place that touches even deeper emotion. Adult children. This is where people become very tender and often very defensive because love can make bad arithmetic feel noble. A parent wants to help. A parent wants to make things easier. A parent remembers the younger version of the child and still feels the instinct to protect, repair, absorb, subsidize, and rescue. I understand that instinct. It is one of the strongest instincts in life. But retirement has a truth that does not negotiate with instinct. You do not have an unlimited number of healthy, active years. Your children, if they are adults, still have time to recover from mistakes, build careers, restructure, adapt, and solve problems. You do not have that same abundance of time. That is not cruelty. It is arithmetic. I have seen parents delay retirement, reduce travel, postpone plans, weaken reserves, and give away too much of their future to shield adult children from discomfort. They were perfectly capable of surviving. The parents call it love. Sometimes it is love. Sometimes it is love mixed with guilt, fear, and the inability to tolerate seeing their children struggle like adults. That distinction matters because retirement cannot be financed by emotion forever. There are no scholarships for your own old age. There are no easy loans for the years after your earning power has peaked. A younger adult can take out a mortgage. He can change jobs. He can rent more simply. He can build slowly. He can make financial mistakes and still recover. A 60-year-old or a 65-year-old cannot so casually sacrifice 3 healthy years and assume life will just hand them back later. It will not. If helping your children truly fits inside a strong retirement plan, then by all means help them. I am not opposed to generosity. I admire it. But generosity that endangers your own stability is often a disguised transfer of risk from younger people with time to older people with less time. That is not always wise. And in truth, helping too much can also deprive the child of something important: responsibility, constraint, patience, creative problem solving. A life built without encountering those things becomes weaker, not kinder. So I would say it this way: if supporting your adult children is costing you peace, freedom, or precious years, you are not only giving money away, you may also be giving away the very stage of life you spent decades earning. That is too expensive. Then there are the object: boats, RVs, extra properties, collections, classic cars, beautiful toys acquired during earning years when ownership itself felt like a victory. I understand these very well because people attach identity to them. A person tells himself the boat represents reward. The classic car represents craftsmanship. The RV represents adventure. The second home represents arrival. And, in fairness, sometimes these things do hold real joy. I am not interested in preaching a life so sparse that nothing delightful remains. But I am deeply interested in the difference between joy and burden. A surprising number of retirees are paying thousands of dollars a year to maintain symbols of a life they no longer actually use. That is not ownership. That is tribute. The object sits in storage, or in a marina, or in a garage, or in a driveway, or behind insurance payments, registration fees, repairs, taxes, upkeep, and all the low-grade attention that comes with keeping a thing alive, even though the thing itself no longer meaningfully participates in your life. I once watched a man wrestle with this over a collection he loved. For years it had brought him enormous satisfaction. He had restored, maintained, polished, and protected each piece with care and pride. And for a long time that made perfect sense because the work itself was part of the pleasure. But retirement changed him a little. Not in a sad way, in a truthful way. He was no longer using most of what he owned. He was preserving a picture of himself. There is a difference. He had become the curator of an old identity rather than the active owner of present joy. That is what many people fail to notice. Past passion does not automatically justify present burden. Eventually, he kept the one item that still genuinely gave him pleasure and released the rest. What he felt afterward was not emptiness. It was clarity. The best part remained, the cost dropped, the stress dropped, the capital was freed. And something psychologically important happened. He stopped managing a museum of his former self and returned to being an enthusiast again. That is a lovely shift. Sometimes keeping everything prevents you from enjoying anything properly. Excess turns delight into administration. That is not a good bargain in retirement. This same logic shows up in an even smaller, almost boring example. The second car, during work years, 2 cars can make perfect. 2 schedules, 2 commutes, 2 sets of obligations moving in different directions. Then retirement arrives and suddenly nobody is commuting. Nobody is racing to the office at dawn. And yet the second car still sits there, depreciating politely, while requiring insurance, maintenance, registration, inspection, batteries, tires, and attention. That is how many financial leaks behave. They stay because they once had a good reason, and nobody revisits the reason after life changes. I like practical tests in situations like this, not philosophical debates tests. Live for 2 months as though the second car is already gone. See what actually breaks. Most couples discover something surprising. The inconvenience is smaller than they feared, while the simplicity is larger than they expected. A car can be one of those objects that feels indispensable, mainly because it is familiar. Familiarity is not the same thing as usefulness. And if one car can handle the new life without stress, the old 2-car assumption deserves to go. I think retirees benefit enormously from these small acts of honest re-examination, because a lot of retirement unhappiness is not dramatic, it is cumulative. Too many little things requiring too much money, attention, upkeep, and mental bandwidth, when the stage of life should be turning toward lighter, cleaner priorities. That brings me to the thing people almost never think of as something they can sell: their old work identity. This may be the hardest one of all. You cannot list it online. You cannot hand it to a broker. You cannot watch the proceeds hit a bank account. And yet for many retirees, it is by far the heaviest item they carry into the next chapter. A person spends 30 years as a doctor, executive attorney, builder, manager, engineer, owner, or specialist. The title becomes attached to the soul. People call him by it. They treat him according to it. He wakes inside a structure that keeps confirming its importance. Then retirement comes, and all at once the applause fades. The urgency fades. The role fades. And some people panic. Not financially, existentially. They start feeling stripped rather than freed. That is a dangerous moment, because many people try to drag the old identity forward rather than discovering who else they are allowed to become. I once knew a man who had spent so many years being introduced by his profession that he could not imagine a life in which his name alone was enough. He was not shallow. He had simply been over-rewarded for one part of himself for so long that everything else felt underdeveloped. When the title ended, he did what many people do. He tried to reconstruct the old feeling. He tried to stand in the old light again. But the real breakthrough came only when he stopped asking how to remain who he had been and started asking who he could become. Now that the old role had loosened its grip, that is the real gift of retirement when handled well, not endless leisure expansion. Parts of you that had no room under decades of professional responsibility can finally come forward. Mentoring, grandparenting, creating, teaching, gardening, writing, volunteering, building things with your hands, traveling with attention rather than on a schedule, becoming a deeper friend, a calmer spouse, a more fully inhabited person. None of that happens easily if you are still dragging a former professional self behind you like ceremonial armor. Armor that once protected you can become the thing that keeps you from touching your new life directly. That is why letting go of work identity may be one of the most valuable sales a person ever makes. Your title was never your whole self. It was what you did. Retirement asks whether you are brave enough to discover what remains when the doing changes. Now, I want to be practical about all of this, because good ideas become useless if they stay vague. How should someone decide whether to sell, stop, reduce, or release something in retirement? I think the decision becomes much clearer when you stop asking sentimental questions first and start asking structural ones. The first useful question is whether the thing still serves your new life or mainly served your old one. That is the center of the whole matter. Does this house, car, object, habit, financial commitment, or identity fit the life I am truly trying to live now? Or does it fit a former version of me that I am keeping alive through habit and memory? There is no shame in admitting that something mattered deeply once and does not matter in the same way. Now that is maturity. Only immature people believe that changing your relationship to an object or role means the original love was not real. It was real then. The question is, what is real now? Not only in direct dollars, though those matter. Maintenance, storage, taxes, utilities, fuel, insurance, repairs, subscriptions, property carrying costs, all of that counts, but also an opportunity. What else could this money be doing for you? Could it buy travel? Could it strengthen reserves? Could it reduce pressure? Could it buy time with family? Could it turn? And there is a further cost. People often ignore: energy, mental space, decision burden, attention. Everything you keep owns a small slice of your life. That is fine when the ownership is mutual and worth it. It is less fine when the object or obligation has quietly become a parasite with sentimental branding. The third useful question is what becomes possible if you let it go. This is where people often discover they were asking the wrong emotional question. They keep focusing on what disappears. They do not ask what opens. If you release the second car, does travel become easier? If you sell the oversized house, does mobility increase? If you reduce financial support to adult children, does your own retirement become sturdier and more peaceful? If you let go of a collection or a burden disguised as a passion project, do you get back money, time, and room to enjoy the one or two pieces that still genuinely matter? If you let go of the old identity, do you discover a more interesting human being underneath it? That is a powerful question. People who ask only what they are losing usually stay trapped. People who ask what might become available are much more likely to simplify intelligently. And there is one more tool I like very much because it reduces drama. The rehearsal before making a permanent decision. Live as though the change has already happened. Do this for 60 or 90 days. If you are wondering about the second car, stop using it. If you are wondering about a vacation property, live as if it were already gone from your life. If you are wondering whether a storage unit of old identity objects still matters, avoid visiting it and notice what you actually miss. If you are uncertain about helping adult children beyond what is wise, stop the flow temporarily and observe what happens to them and to you. If you are uncertain whether you are clinging to the house or the memories, imagine the equity already moved and the house already released. Then ask yourself what you feel. Not what sounds respectable, what you feel. Most people are surprised by the answer. Often the first feeling is fear. Then comes something more interesting. Relief. Relief is one of the most useful emotions in retirement design. If a person rehearses a simpler life and discovers relief, he has learned something important. Relief is often the soul recognizing that it was carrying something no longer required. Now, I should say very clearly that retirement is not about stripping life down to bare walls and one folding chair. That would be foolish. The point is not to remove all comfort, all beauty, all generosity, all pleasure, and all sentiment. The point is to distinguish between what adds life and what merely occupies it. That is a much wiser standard. I have met retirees with surprisingly modest lifestyles who felt rich because their life was full of freedom, time, mobility, affection, and low stress. I have also met retirees with substantial assets who felt pinned down by too much house, too many obligations, too many objects, too many unfinished old identities, and too many quiet drains on their attention. The difference was rarely net worth alone. It was fit. A well-fitted retirement feels light. An ill-fitted retirement feels crowded even when the closets are full and the statements are large. That is why I admire simplification done with intelligence. Not panic simplification, not deprivation selection. The mature retiree is not the one who owns the most. It is the one who understands what should remain and what can finally be released without regret. And that brings me to the deepest point. Retirement is not a reward for endurance. It is a transfer of authorship. For many years, life was scheduled by responsibility, profession, children, debt service, calendars, and structure imposed from the outside. Now the question becomes whether you will write this chapter intentionally or let inertia and old possessions write it for you. Inertia is a very bad author. It fills retirement with leftovers from a life you are no longer living and then tells you to call that gratitude. I do not think that is enough. If you have worked hard, saved honestly, and earned, then you deserve more than a crowded museum of old obligations. You deserve a life designed for the person you are now. That design process will require courage, because letting go always asks you to admit time has passed. Children grew, the career chapter changed. Some passions became memories rather than daily realities. Some possessions became burdens rather than delights. Some forms of help became too expensive. Some titles stopped being central. That is not failure. That is adulthood. The person who resists all of that ends up surrounded by proof that life changed while still trying to live as though it did not. The person who accepts it can shape something beautiful, lighter, truer, more mobile, more peaceful, more aligned. That is the kind of retirement I admire, not a life with no possessions, a life in which possessions, obligations, and old identities are finally in their proper place. Useful when they still serve. Gone when they no longer do. If I were near retirement, or already there, I would look at my life with a colder eye and a warmer heart, a colder eye toward cost, burden, maintenance, and hidden obligation, a warmer heart toward time, experience, health, family, and the parts of life that grow stronger when there is less clutter around them. I would ask what still belongs. What is only here because it once belonged? What is costing me years without admitting it? What am I funding out of habit? What am I preserving? Because it flatters the old version of me, and if I let it go, what kind of life might become available that cannot appear while my hands are still full? Those are the questions that matter, because the happiest retirees I have known were not always the ones with the biggest houses, the most toys, the most impressive old titles, or the greatest number of things still under management. They were the ones who understood the difference between what they owned and what owned them. That is wisdom. And wisdom, unlike accumulation, becomes more valuable the fewer healthy years remain. So if you are entering this chapter, remember this: retirement is not mainly a test of how much you kept. It is a test of whether you can release what no longer serves the life you are trying to protect. Do that well, and money becomes more useful, time becomes more vivid. And the next stage begins to feel less like a continuation of maintenance and more like what it was supposed to be all along: a freer life.